In this video, we're going to take a look at acid deposition. And so we're going to take a look at what it is, what its definition is, and how it arises in our environment. So let's start out by talking about rain. Well, when we hear acid deposition, that's kind of the general term for acid rain. There's more that encompasses it, and we'll get into that in a moment. But rain by itself is actually naturally acidic. And so, what I mean by that is that rain or the water will react with carbon dioxide in the atmosphere and it will form carbonic acid, which is a weak acid that partially dissociates. So, because of this reaction, this is a naturally occurring event, and that gives rainwater a pH of about 5.6. Okay, so this is very natural to happen. Acid deposition happens when the pH is less than 5. So it is an addition on top of this natural process that already happens and the natural sort of acidic nature of rain itself. So, like I said, and like I alluded to, there are different types of acid deposition. So, this is very much a general term for a variety of different sort of types. There are the wet deposition types, which you're probably more familiar with. So things like acid rain is an example of a wet type of acid deposition. But you also have acid fog and you can have acid snow as well. In terms of dry deposition, these are arising from acidic gases, which we'll talk about in a minute, because we're going to take a look at where acid rain actually comes from and acid deposition, as well as different particles in the environment. So let's talk about some sources first of acidic pollutants. So the first main one that we're going to look at is sulfur dioxide. And so sulfur dioxide can result and can be generated into our environment from a couple of different sources. The main key ones that we tend to be the biggest contributors to sulfur dioxide are power stations, and we would say that power stations are anthropogenic. You would have seen this in previous science courses, but what this really means is that this is human causes to contributing to these pollutants in our environment. So, power stations is one. And in terms of a natural example of sulfur dioxide, that can result from volcanic explosions or volcanic eruptions. And so that's a natural source of sulfur dioxide, but it still is a pollutant because it's sulfur dioxide in our atmosphere. And when we have sulfur dioxide in our atmosphere, it will react with the water in our atmosphere to produce sulfurous acid and sulfuric acid. And we'll look at those reactions in a moment. The other source of acidic pollutants are the nitrogen oxides. And so I've got NOx here as the chemical formula because there are various different types of nitrogen oxides that do exist. And again, we have causes from humans as well as natural causes of these pollutants in our environment. So, an example of an anthropogenic or human related cause of nitrogen oxides in our environment is from transportation and the exhaust coming out of our cars, our trucks, any of our vehicles result in releasing nitrogen oxides. In terms of a natural source, lightning is a great example of a natural source of nitrogen oxides in our environment. So they can again come from both human related as well as natural sources. And when nitrogen oxides react with water in the atmosphere, they produce either nitrous acid or nitric acid. And so let's take a look at the reactions that happen a little bit more closely. So we'll start with the reactions involving sulfur dioxide. So where does, first off, sulfur dioxide come from? Well, a lot of the, especially in power stations, the coal fueled burning power stations use sulfur as a source, and that sulfur reacts with oxygen to produce sulfur dioxide. From there, that sulfur dioxide can react with water in our atmosphere, and that will produce H2SO3, which is sulfurous acid. You can also have sulfur dioxide reacting with more oxygen, and that will produce sulfur trioxide. And then sulfur trioxide reacting with water is how we produce sulfuric acid. And so both of these present in our atmosphere and in our rainwater or in acid fog, acid snow, any of those different types of sources will result in precipitation coming down that has a pH of less than 5. Now, sort of turning our attention to reactions involving nitrogen oxides. So, first off, nitrogen oxides are produced when nitrogen reacts with oxygen to produce nitrogen monoxide. And that nitrogen monoxide can also further react with oxygen to produce nitrogen dioxide. And that nitrogen dioxide then is what reacts with water and can form a mixture of HNO2, which is our nitrous acid, and HNO3, which is our nitric acid. Now, you can also have NO2 further reacting with oxygen and water to also produce nitric acid as well. So, those are just some of the reactions, but it's the production then of nitrous or nitric acid that will result in, again, that precipitation or that wet deposition that has a pH of less than 5. So, just to kind of summarize, we have two acidic gases. We've got sulfur dioxide and we've got the nitrogen oxides. Sulfur dioxides come from the combustion of sulfur containing coal or volcanic eruptions. There are other sources, but those are just two key ones that you should know. And they form either sulfurous or sulfuric acid. Nitrogen oxides come from either internal combustion engines or lightning, and they will result in forming nitrous or nitric acid. That's it for this video then. Let's move on to our next task.